Did you know in a study done, 56% of young people thought the world was doomed? And I don't know about you, but do you find yourself like doomsday scrolling? You go through social media and just keep on looking at these, I guess, clickbait titles and news articles that are full of fear and don't give us an awful lot of hope or optimism. See, there's something though also that's quite enticing about it, right? Why do we keep on clicking on these titles and these media outlets? Why do we keep on feeding ourselves these bleak outlooks on life? Well, I got Dr. Natasha Moore to come on and speak about her book, which was released in 2020. It's not a brand new book, The Pleasures of Pessimism. But she came on to talk about, I guess, the pleasures and also the perils of our pessimism, how we can be aware of maybe our inclination for pessimism, and also to push back on those that are maybe too optimistic. How do we find a healthy balance? And what does that look like for us just in life and society in general, but also what does that look like for us as Christians? And so Dr. Natasha is a senior research fellow at the Center for Public Christianity, CPX, you might also know them as. She has a PhD in English literature, clearly not me because I can't even say English at the moment, from the University of Cambridge, and is the author for The Love of God, How the Church is Better and Worse Than You Ever Imagined, which won the 2020 Christian Book of the Year, and also this book here, The Pleasures of Pessimism. She often does writing and collaboration pieces for the Sydney Morning Herald, ABC News, ABC Religion and Ethics, SBS The Spectator, Guardian, and more. So she comes to us with a well thought out view on this topic and also knows how to articulate her points well. She really gives us a really great in-depth look into historically, culturally, society, where we find ourselves in regards to pessimism and optimism. So I hope this interview will help you. It was fun. It was a fun conversation. Now, if you're new to Her Theology, thank you for joining along. It's such a pleasure to have you with me. If you're new and you haven't already, follow along on Instagram, Her Theology, to stay up to date with podcast shorts and reels, information, what's going on, and just some general insights and things that goes on. You can follow me privately, Cass Backhouse, that's CA1S Backhouse. And that's where I'm starting. I just created that Instagram account to just separate a bit of the motherhood and parenting stuff that I want to talk about more, because a lot of you, my beautiful Her Theology regular listeners, are not parents. You might not be in that season. And so I didn't want to bog down the Instagram account with that information. So if you find yourself in that season or you want information on how to talk to your kids about different and hard topics, then follow that account, which you'll get a bit of an insight into my personal life and just my thoughts on how to address the different topics that I talk about in the podcast, but more relatable to kids. So there's that. Head to hertheology.com if you want to find out more about the vision and mission. You can become an insider there and get regular, well, very irregular email updates from me, and leave a review. Sign up to whatever platform you're listening to follow along to this podcast. And like I said, leave a review. It's very helpful. Other than that, I hope you enjoy this episode. Share it with your friends and family. It's the best way to go. All right, enjoy. Hi, Natasha. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate your time. You're coming to us from beautiful Adelaide, which is, what is it? It's like the city of churches, isn't it? Or is that what it's
Allegedly, yes. There are many churches. They're not all still churches, but they're beautiful.
They're still beautiful, right? Yes. And is it freezing cold there? Because it is freezing
It is
cold
today, yes. Yeah. I've got my scarf on.
I know, I noticed that. I was like, it is so cold. It's like winter has come. It has arrived,
Early.
my friends.
Mm.
So I really enjoyed your book, The Pleasures of Pessimism. It's short, it's pithy, it's to the point, and it's fun. I felt like, I don't know if this is a compliment or not. I hope it's a compliment. It's a compliment is what I'm going to say. It felt like reading a really cool New York Times article to me.
Aw,
So
that's nice.
that's what I felt like when I was reading it. I said to my husband, like, you should read this. It's just like reading a good size article.
It is very compact. Yes.
Yes.
We have a series of these books and they're all very short. You can absorb it in like a couple hours kind of thing.
Yes. I think I really appreciate that actually, because I don't know about you. I feel like there's a lot of books out there at the moment that there's a lot of then this is going to sound offensive, faff.
There's a lot that might be edited down, perhaps.
That doesn't necessarily in there. So it is good and helpful. So I got you on because I am a pessimist. I have been rebuked several times by friends
Oh,
in church circles. And I thought, no, that's right. There is pleasure in pessimism. And let's talk about that.
sure. I mean, I feel like the title is a little maybe it draws you in, and then I hope it doesn't do a bait and switch, but I think I probably land more strongly on the problems with pessimism rather than
You
the
do,
pleasure of it
definitely.
being a good thing. But we have places for pessimists and optimists
That's right.
within the church and elsewhere.
You enticed us pessimists into this title, so it's good. But do you want to maybe explain to people, because some people might be going, what on earth are you talking about? What is pessimism and what is the opposite to it?
Sure. Yeah, these are terms that we kind of throw around a bit, aren't they? And I suppose some of the meaning is a bit disputed because everyone kind of thinks they're a realist. So the pessimist is the person who tends to look not on the bright side of things, on the dark side, perhaps, who tends to be a bit more worried about the future and expect that things will go wrong. The optimist, the opposite, tends to think that things will be fine, things will work out, she'll be right. And often people say, well, I'm not that, either one of those. I'm not an optimist, just I think I see things as they are and they usually go right. Or I'm not a pessimist, I'm just a realist, things usually go wrong. But I think those are kind of personality traits that we maybe lean a bit more one way or the other. And the book is less about kind of our personality type or whether we're personally optimistic or pessimistic about our own lives, and more about a trend towards cultural pessimism, that the ways that we talk about our life together, as a society, as a culture, um, is quite negative in a lot of ways. We're quite doomy, right?
We love
Social media is quite doomy, and that affects us and affects, what we can achieve as a society.
So, I mean, I was, as you're saying, cultural, and then you also said when you're talking about optimists, she'll be right. I do think that's the Australian culture, right? It's like this weird thing that's going on is that ingrained in our culture is this she'll be right attitude. And yet
Mm.
at the same time, our media and the world around us is so doomsday. So what culture do we find ourselves in at the moment? Because it feels a bit weird, doesn't it? It feels like we're battling within us.
Yeah, and I mean, we contain multitudes, right? So, the same way that the Australian character, we kind of feel like we're anti-authoritarian and we're larrikins, but we're actually very strong health and safety people. Like, we really
Yeah,
don't
true.
like risk. So we have these kind of conflicting ideas of ourselves. And I think similarly, yeah, in a lot of ways, we're kind of optimistic. We don't have as strong a sense as many countries of like the weight of our past. Some might argue we should have more sense of a weight of, some things in our past. And so there is a kind of like, we're forward facing, we think things are going to be right, with a lucky country. But at the same time, I think we're very cautious, and I think it was Joseph Heller, the writer, who said, every change is for the worse. And I feel as though Australians are a bit like that. We're like, we won't risk that. Let's not risk kind of change. Like, probably everything will
It's
fall
so
apart if we do.
we are slightly risk adverse, aren't we?
Mm.
And I
I mean,
wonder,
I personally am as well. I don't know how much of that is my Australianness.
do you think risk adverseness is the same as change? This I feel like humans, some of us are really open to change. Like, I think we all struggle somewhat with change,
Mm.
but some of us might be more open than others. Do you think they're two of the same thing? Like, is that all pessimism, or is it something different that's going on there?
Yeah, good question. I think there are probably shades of this, right?
Mm.
And also, it may be different in different areas of your life. You may be, I kind of think of myself in some ways as optimistic about things, or confident about things. I don't worry about things where I'm not in control. So like I'm not afraid of flying. I'm not afraid of surgery generally. Like, I can get nervous about these things, but I find public speaking, I mean, I do it a lot, so I don't find it as nerve-wracking as I once did. But, public speaking where it's like I can fail, like that fear of failure, I feel a lot more strongly. Whereas other people feel, very concerned where they aren't in control, where they're sitting in
Mm.
the passenger seat in a jet and are like, I can't control what's going to happen here. So I think we can kind of be optimistic or positive about certain aspects of our lives, and in other areas be very concerned about change. We might love change that we choose and be horrified by change that kind of happens to us passively and really struggle to adjust to that. There are kind of nuances to these things, I think.
Mm. And so what was it then you were hoping to address with the book? Like, what was your heart behind writing a book on this,
Mm.
given the culture we find ourselves in Australia, and I guess also tying in the modern media world messaging that we find ourselves in? Why this book?
Yeah, I was asked to give a lecture for ADM, Anglican Deaconess Ministries, a great organization in Sydney in 2019. And they were like, you can talk about anything, like what's on your heart, what's going on. And I was like, okay, let me think about this. And, what we do at the Center for Public Christianity is kind of, we're a Christian voice in the public square. So what we're always doing is kind of looking at the culture around us, taking the temperature of it, trying to figure out, okay, what's going on for people? And therefore, how does Christian faith speak into that, connect with that, potentially change that? And so I'd been doing that for several years at this point. And the topic of cultural pessimism, for me, it kind of dawned on me suddenly reading an essay by Marilyn Robinson, who's one of my favorite authors. She's written some wonderful novels like Gilead. And also very insightful essays on cultural stuff. And she talked about how cultural pessimism is just this huge problem for us, this sense of
Mm.
like we're always in a state of kind of existential threat. And what that does, if it's inaccurate, which, we can argue about that, is that it leads us to be alarmist, it leads us to turn against each other. It actually becomes its own problem in the culture
Mm.
if we're like everything's going to hell in a handbasket, and therefore we kind of take drastic measures, we get more polarized, and I was like, this kind of explains a lot of what I'm seeing, and commenting on these separate like trends in culture and going, actually this unites a lot of it, our sense of everything's getting worse and like potentially catastrophically so. And I don't say that to at all minimize things that are going wrong and could potentially go terribly wrong in our near or far future. But just to say that the way that we respond to that and our sense of that is going to have a big impact on how we address those things, whether they do come to pass, whether we can actually kind of engage with them as a culture, and how we, experience them in our own lives. There was a survey that came out a few years ago about climate anxiety among young people.
Mm.
And like huge survey, 10,000 people across 10 countries, I think. And like 75% or 76% of young people agreed with the statement, uh, the future is frightening.
Mm.
56% agreed with the statement, humanity is doomed. Like if 56% of young people are like, humanity is doomed, and it was a little lower in Australia, it was 50%. Only half of Australian young people said that they think humanity is doomed. And you kind of go, once that's our approach to life, that's our sense of like, no matter what I do, we're all going down with the ship. That's concerning for our mental health,
Mm.
for our sense of being able to do good in the world, for the ways that we engage with each other. So I was like, I think this is actually kind of a quite fundamental thing for our culture.
Yeah, it's actually, as you unpack it that way, and especially as you read the book, you do start thinking, wow, this is it's pervasive without realizing it. And I wonder if
Mm.
it's the reason for part of the reason for the mental health crisis that we're seeing. Or, I also thought of, when you were talking about that, like the future is doomed. There's also a rise at the moment of people, I forget the actual term they use for it, but like intentionally not having children,
Yeah.
like young men going and getting the snip, early on because they just don't think it's wise to have any more children because we're overpopulating the earth and for climate
Mm.
change reasons and whatever other
And that's
barrage.
a profound statement, right? About
Huge.
a vote for or against the future. Like, will I continue humanity?
Well, I mean, I don't know the world history in this sense, but I do feel like, is this a new mindset that we're seeing that,
Mm.
I mean, historically, through ancient civilizations and modern history, it's always about, continuing your lineage and like continuing your legacy. But yet there's this pessimism that's created a sense of, yeah,
Mm.
it ends here with us. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually not sure about the intentional childlessness. I'm
Mm,
sure that this is not the first time that that has come up, but I'm not aware of when that hasn't come up historically. But
mm,
certainly the sense of um, it's the end of the world and it's the decline of civilization as we know it. That is an extremely common sense within history.
mm.
And you can look back at, we kind of flatten the past in a way. And when you go back and read stuff from the time, people are extremely worried about many things.
Well, the World
Um,
War is a great example,
and
right?
think that their time is uniquely a
Mm.
disaster frequently. So that's not new. Again, it doesn't mean we're wrong, but it's suggestive that every time has like hugely significant challenges, and that this is quite a human tendency.
Mm.
And I think it helps to know that, to be aware that, okay, well, if to some extent our default is towards that, let's just take a breath and
Just chill for a moment.
assess whether that's accurate and whether it's serving us.
Yeah, true. And so do you want to maybe take us a bit of a history through pessimism? Like, have you seen, like when you did it, did you look historically at the ebbs and flows of it within culture, or is it like more pertaining to those that are like in the Western civilizations? Is it like, yeah, did you want to flesh that out a bit?
Um,
You
I
may not have
mean,
to answer
pessimism
that.
in general, I think that would be a tall order.
Yes.
Certainly, I
Yeah.
will say that the end is nigh
Mm,
sentiment is common across cultures and historical
mm,
periods. I'm sure there are kind of correlations, and I haven't looked that closely at this in terms of times of economic insecurity or demographic change or whatever. There are kind of significant moments that recur, uh, say, decades apart,
mm.
where this kind of thinking is more likely. And the religious beliefs of the culture will factor into that. But that doesn't necessarily mean, we have Christian faith has an eschatology, it has a story of end times.
Yes.
Um, but obviously, that's been interpreted in many different ways across history. And you can be both optimistic and pessimistic about that. The Bible's
Yeah.
vision of the end times is of a new heavens and a new earth where, everything evil is done away with, and everything is put right. Like, this is a positive vision.
Mm.
Whereas often, even within kind of more Christian cultures where that, where the book of Revelation is kind of feeding into that end is nigh sense,
Yeah.
it's doing so in ways that are quite doomy, um,
Yeah.
and that are, quite negative about where the world is at now and where it could possibly go. Now, obviously, that's a whole disputed
Yes.
area of theology, whether things are going to decline into disaster and oblivion or whether things can get better and better. And, we maybe won't go there.
A whole other, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, I have to say it was funny when you were talking about, generations all have an end is near, I think of, I can only imagine what the Christians that hold to particular views would have thought during World War II. Like
Mm.
there's different perspectives depending on your theology. You're exactly right.
Yeah, and I think a little bit of historical perspective is really helpful here because
Absolutely.
whereas we can be so kind of self-centric, so our time centric, and think this is a uniquely terrible thing, or the biblical prophecies are talking about this person or this organization. And if you look back across history at those kinds of interpretations cropping up over and over, and the certainty that goes with them, and the certainty that goes with this is when Jesus is going to return, I think it pays to have a dose of kind of humility and caution
Yeah.
about those kinds of predictions.
Yeah. And understand that Jesus said it wasn't for us to know the time. We can
Yeah.
look into things. It's good to be
We
aware of
don't like
things.
not knowing things.
Right. And he's like, fear not, just rest in me. So,
Mm.
so can you maybe then tell me what are some of the pitfalls for pessimism and what's some of the pros? Because there are some pros as well. So do you want to flesh that out? And maybe we'll
Yeah.
also somehow that'll tie into optimism. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll see. Um, I think that particularly as personality traits, both optimism and pessimism are kind of needed. Like extreme versions of either are probably pathological and to be avoided. But, if you think about kind of a group of people working together, it helps to have both perspectives. For there to be someone who's like, here are all the things that could go wrong and I'm quite worried about them. And for someone to be like, let's just go at it and, it'll work out in the wash. And you kind of need both of those perspectives, I think, to make things happen in the world. Um, there is research out there. I haven't looked closely at this, but I have heard it said multiple times that pessimists are more often right, but optimists do better.
Okay. Interesting.
So, like pessimists will say, at least if I think something terrible is going to happen, either I'm right or I'm pleasantly surprised. So you kind of go, well, that's a good
I
place
said
to
that.
be. But I think optimists, even if they're often wrong, it has been suggested that things go better for them because of what they expect, not in a manifestation way, but in a kind of picking yourself up and continuing and pushing through, rather than being, easily demoralized or paralyzed by fear of the future, that kind of thing. I think from a cultural pessimism perspective, there are some serious negatives. Um, one of them is kind of the polarization that I've talked about a little bit, that I
Yeah.
think our pessimism is not just, oh, everything's going to hell in a handbasket. It's specifically, and those people are driving it there. And that's a huge problem for our public life and our common life, for being able to make things happen, being able to consider and change things. Because if you're like, well, about 50% of my fellow citizens are like basically either radically wrong or even possibly evil, that makes it very hard to kind of
Mm.
get anywhere or do anything. There's others like I guess paralysis, a sense of, well, if nothing we do makes any difference, or, there's nothing that we can change about what's coming down the line, then, it's easy to just kind of be passive and retreat and kind of go, well, I'll just do what I can, like, to enjoy my own life. And there's no point in trying something more. I think there's sort of a, not exactly an upside, but uh, an element or a dimension to this public cultural pessimism that can be helpful. And I think that's the sense in which it's a measure for us of what is wrong and what could be
Mhm.
better. That, I don't think there's a lot of kind of blind optimism, like everything will be fine and we don't have to do anything and the world is great. I don't think that's a common issue,
I'm
but
yet to experience that issue from
you have.
no, I said I'm yet to
Yes,
experience that
yes.
issue.
Um, But so I think sometimes our pessimism and our negativity about what's going on is an expression of longing for something better, for
Mm.
something other. And even, catastrophizing is not usually a, a fruitful, a productive thing. But even that like sense of catastrophe, if it can spur us to be like, okay, we got to do something. We got to, treat this seriously. And maybe things being terrible or getting really worse will give us the impetus to actually make change. I think hypothetically, at least,
Yeah,
that could be a help.
because as you're saying that, I'm thinking like we would like for that to be the go, but I wonder if, and I'm speaking from my own personal self, you know, I don't listen to the news or anything anymore because I just think there's no point. It is so fear-based. It is so
Mm,
divisive. When you're talking about division, the pitfalls of pessimism is um, this this division that can take place. You look at what's happening in America with the elections. I mean, that was so intense to see the
mm,
division taking place. This pessimism of, everyone else on the other side is so evil and doesn't get it and is an idiot and a moron.
mm,
It's wild
yeah,
to see how quick we can fall into those. And I've fallen into that trap. I'm guilty as charged. I do it as well.
yeah,
Um, and it is interesting to see how pervasive it is through these narratives and these messages that are coming through. And I can't help but think I just am at a point where it's almost like not pessimism, it's not optimism. It's just I've given up. I just don't
yeah.
care anymore. And I wonder if
Mm.
that's another, like you said, an apathy towards everything.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, a big question is because there are positives to at least for part of your life, kind of withdrawing from a lot of that.
True.
If you go, well, where are my energies currently directed? If you, for example, have small children, then there's a sense in which your world kind of focuses in on that for some
Mm.
period of time, and that if you're not a news junkie, and it's probably healthy not to be, it's rational and right to withdraw from that and be like, I'm not going to actively
Mm.
participate in that for some time. For those of us who are participating, or who are convinced that it's our responsibility to participate in that kind of like element of our public life, then like we got to do that wisely and well and with real attention to what it's doing to us, right? Because you get in these echo chambers. And I work for a media company, so we'll be on Twitter, on X, we'll be on Instagram, we'll be reading articles and looking at the arguments, and then I'll talk to people who are not in that world, and they'll be like, oh, I didn't hear anything about that thing
Yeah,
that
I didn't even know that was a
has
thing.
been huge in the for the very online this week, but for most people is not even kind of like
Mm.
breaking consciousness. So I think we got to work out ways to consume wisely and well, to
Absolutely.
look for good news as well as bad news, because there is good news as well. It's just not usually reportable. Um, and to keep anchored with
Mm.
reality. I mean, there are some really interesting kind of studies and statistics, like survey results, which show just differences between how people feel about how society is going and how they feel about their own life or their local community, where people will be like, obviously everything is a disaster, nationally or at a societal level. But I don't see that around me. Like, my life's pretty good. Like,
Mm.
maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But I can see opportunity and the capacity to act and stuff in my day-to-day life. And so there's a real disjunction. Like, there's an extent to which that national dimension doesn't exist. It's a projection. There
Right.
are only kind of local and individual and community realities. So if those are overall positive, then this kind of bigger scale thing is mostly a figment of our imaginations. And it is like an important figment of our imaginations if we're going to project a life together and figure out how to make that work. But we've got to be careful that it's not just, uh, endless doom scrolling.
Yeah.
There's this website called the Endless Doom Scroller, which is I came across when I was looking at this stuff, and it's like it's an endless doom scroller. So like it just has these kind of generic headlines that you go through. It's like new reports spark alarm, devastating setbacks, global crisis looms, numbers paint grim picture. And it goes on and on
Was
forever.
it
Like
just
there's no
Instagram
getting
or?
to the end of it. And it's kind of a comment on the experience of scrolling through your news feed. That if that's like just scrolling through it and it's all made up, but you feel your kind of blood pressure rise a bit, because if we're constantly exposed to that stuff, then that's going to have a significant influence on our mental health and how we think the world is going and what we think we can do about it.
So I guess coming back into then more a faith-based side of things when it comes to pessimism and optimism, should Christians be pessimists? Should they be optimists? Because talking about briefly offline, but, I've grown up in a Pentecostal and Baptist background and now find myself in evangelical Anglican Reform circles. And so I find it almost feels like a character within the church, depending on what denomination you sit with, as to whether you're more optimistic, whether you're more pessimistic. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like, where do Christians fit into all this? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, the denominational kind of personality traits, isn't it?
Yeah.
That
And you don't
obviously we choose our church affiliations based on what we feel to be often deeply rational, or else kind of community based, like this is who I got to know, this is where I became a Christian, etc. But we got to feel like personality plays into some of those
Absolutely.
choices, and temperament.
Yeah.
And we both are drawn to those things, but also then we're formed by the particular kind of culture that we church in. The liturgies that we perform in those contexts will shape how we feel about the present and the future. And some of those as with a team of people working on something, needs the optimists and the pessimists.
Absolutely.
Like similarly, the church, we all need each other, and the different insights that we bring, and we all tip over into unhelpful kind of versions of ourselves. So I wouldn't be like, these people have it right and these people don't, necessarily.
No.
But yeah, I mean, there is a real sense in which for Christians, it's both. It's got to be both. Francis Spufford, the writer, the English writer, he talks about how Christianity is both more optimistic and more pessimistic than we expect.
Okay.
So we're more pessimistic about human nature than the culture around us, because the Bible is
Right.
very, what I would call realistic about the human heart, that it's a full-on mess. And therefore, we should be pessimistic about what humans can be and do, and not be surprised. If you start with the position of humans are basically good, which is a very strong kind of strand in our culture, then you're going to be constantly shocked and discouraged, and be tempted to give up.
Denial.
When you kind of can't deny that actually there's so much corruption and there's so much cruelty and there's so much evil in the world, that can't be a surprise to Christians, because the Bible encourages us to be quite pessimistic about human nature. On the other hand, it encourages us to be hugely optimistic about where things are headed, and about what human nature can be with God's help, and with his transforming presence. So, a big part of whether you think you can act in the world and whether there's any point in doing so, is going to be like, what kind of universe do you think we live in? Do we live in a random one where, things might go well or they might go badly, and there's no particular reason why it should be one or the other? Like things like justice and order are things that we impose as humans, as this, fluke evolved creature. We impose those on a reality that doesn't know anything about them. Whereas if you think that justice and peace and beauty and joy are built into the fabric of the universe, because the God who created the universe is and creates those things, then that's going to make a huge difference to your sense of, is it worth fighting injustice? Is it worth trying to bring about good in the face of great failure to do so? When things aren't working out, when, the adversity is just kind of looks insurmountable. If you believe in a God who's beyond that and anchoring that and saying, well, ultimately, whether you fail or succeed at this particular moment, at this particular thing, ultimately the arc of the universe bends towards justice, then, you can work at something and be like, okay, the world is not ours to save. There's kind of a book called that, which I haven't read, but it's a great title.
Okay. Yep.
The world is not ours to save, but I'm called to act and to do what I can with what I've been given, to make things better, not worse.
Yeah.
In the place that I find myself. And I can do that and trust that, it's not all on me. So I think it's both, right? Christians are going to be more optimistic and less optimistic than their neighbors, or we should be.
Yes. And do you think that's largely attached to hope? Would you say optimism and hope go kind of hand in hand in that sense?
Yes. I mean, I don't want to, because it depends on whether optimism, if you're an optimist, you're like, oh, it's just hope. And if you're a pessimist, you're like, optimists are deluded.
That's true.
And what they're doing is just kind
I
of
don't think it's hope.
counting things that should be properly seen and lamented and so on.
Mm.
And hope is not that. Hope is not kind of la, 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 like ignoring, what's terrible, refusing to look at it. Hope has room for lament, and room for things going radically wrong in the short and long term.
I
But
think
it also, sorry.
I was going to say, you talk about lamentations in the book as well, right? You quote, Ecclesiastes, is it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Ecclesiastes.
yeah,
Mm,
Ecclesiastes, which is exactly what
mm.
we're talking about. There's hope, but we're still assessing the reality of what needs to change or what will happen, right?
Yeah. It's an extremely, in many ways, pessimistic book,
Yeah.
Ecclesiastes, this book of wisdom that, it's probably the most surprising book to find in the Bible. That is this person being like, meaningless, everything is meaningless. What's the point in doing anything? Everything ends up the same. If you're good or bad, you still die. Like, these things that you're like, is this something you're allowed to say in the Bible?
Yeah.
Whereas it's profoundly tapping into something that we experience. I've spoken to teachers about these passages where I feel like teachers particularly, you come back for another term and it's like, there's nothing new under the sun. We do this and we do that and everything ends up the same, and you've got to gear up to do the same things over and over. And we all feel this in work, of whatever form, at some point. And, the Bible's realistic about that. It honors that. It kind of goes, yeah, you can feel like nothing ever changes, and what's the point? And to look at that, to build that into the sense of this is what human experience is, but it's not the whole story. I think hope does that. It's realistic about that.
Well, thank you, Natasha, for coming on. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a really fun chat.
Where can people find you if they want to find you or follow along or read your latest things? What's the best way to do that?
You can follow me on Instagram is probably the best place these days, at Dr. Natasha Moore. I'm also on X, but I'm not on there much at the moment.
I
Um,
can't blame you. It's a lot of
and you can sign up to follow the Center for Public Christianity. My colleagues and I are, always writing things and
You've got podcasts as well.
yeah, we've got our Life and Faith podcast. So
Yeah,
yeah, you can go to publicchristianity.org and sign up for our newsletter and everything.
that's awesome.
Mm.
All right, great. Well, thanks for your time, Natasha. Everyone, if you enjoyed this episode, share it with your friends and family, leave a review. But yeah, share it with friends and family. That's probably the best way to get it out there and get this conversation going. Where do you land? Are you a pessimist? Are you an optimist? And how can you help your brother and sister in Christ grow in these areas and have grace for one another more? So I hope you enjoyed this and we'll chat to you next week. Thanks for